We've all felt it, right? Whether you're trying to buy a house or just rent an apartment, the prices are absolutely staggering, and there's just nothing out there. This isn't just happening in one or two cities, it's a full-blown national housing crisis. But, right now, Congress is actually closer than they've been in a generation to passing a major law that could finally start to fix it. So, let's get into it.
So what's the real problem here? Honestly, it all boils down to this number. Depending on which expert you ask, the U.S. is short somewhere between 1 and 7 million homes. That massive gap between how many homes we have and how many we need, that's the reason prices have just shot into the stratosphere, completely disconnected from what a normal family can actually afford.
So Washington's answer is this thing called the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. And it's a huge deal. It's bipartisan, and it is packed with ideas designed to attack that supply shortage head-on. Things like cutting red tape and creating incentives to build more. It's a really serious attempt to finally build our way out of this mess.
But here's the catch. Buried inside this really promising bill, there's a huge conflict brewing. While most of it is laser-focused on building, one key part of it takes a totally different and maybe even contradictory approach. It's created what is basically a fork in the road for our entire housing policy.
It kind of reminds me of that classic Yogi Berra quote, right? When there's a fork in the road, take it. Well, the Road to Housing Act is trying to take both paths at the same time, and they could lead us to two very different places.
Okay, so let's really break down these two paths. On one side, you've got Path 1, putting new restrictions on big investors to stop them from buying up so many houses. This is a politically popular move. On the other side, there's Path 2. Just go all in on boosting supply, which is what pretty much every economist will tell you is the real long-term solution. The entire bill is stuck right in the middle of these two competing philosophies.
All right, so let's dig into that first path, the political one. And you can totally see why it's so tempting for lawmakers, right?
I mean, who doesn't love a good villain? The story of these Wall Street landlords buying up entire neighborhoods, it gets people fired up. Doesn't matter if you're on the left or the right. When housing costs are this high, blaming a big, faceless corporation is an easy political win. But what do the numbers actually say?
Okay, get ready for this, because when you look at the actual data, the story completely flips. Those institutional investors, we're talking the big corporate guys, they own just 0.7% of the country's 92 million single-family homes. That's it. It's an incredibly small slice of the pie.
Okay, you might be thinking, well, what about just rental homes? Even there, they only make up about 5% of all single-family rentals. The huge majority are still owned by smaller mom-and-pop landlords. And here's maybe the most shocking number of all. In 2023, these big investors were behind only 1% of all home purchases nationwide. So the takeaway here is massive. Even if you completely ban these guys tomorrow, it would barely even register in the market.
But here's the thing. While this policy might not do much to help, it could do some very real damage. It could accidentally sabotage one of the fastest-growing sources of new housing supply in the country and hurt the very people who need it most. I'm talking about something called build-to-rent communities. Picture this: entire neighborhoods of brand-new, single-family homes all built from scratch specifically for renters. It has become a huge and vital source of new housing stock in the last few years. So here's the rub. The bill has a provision that would force the investors who build these new rental communities to sell off all the homes within just 7 years. That just completely shatters the business model. It's like telling an apartment developer they have to sell their building one condo at a time just a few years after opening. Experts are saying this would simply crush all new construction in this area.
And you have to ask, who does this really hurt? There's this common assumption that everyone living in these places is just desperately trying to buy a house. But check this out. A national survey found that more than a third of the people who live there actually prefer to rent.
And we're not talking about some fringe group here. We're talking about families moving for a new job, young professionals saving up for a down payment, and a lot of high-earning households who just want the space of a house without, the headaches of owning. Taking this option away doesn't help them buy a house. It just leaves them with fewer choices.
Okay, so if these big investors aren't really the main villains driving up prices, what is? Well, to get that, we need to rewind the clock a bit, back to what happened right after the 2008 financial crisis.
So the market crashes, right? And in response, regulators, they made it way harder to get a mortgage. Lending standards got incredibly tight. And the result? A huge chunk of the middle class, people who would have been first-time homebuyers, were suddenly locked out of the market. But they didn't just disappear. They had to rent instead. So now you've got this giant new pool of renters who need a place to live. And who stepped in to provide houses for them? You guessed it, large investors. They weren't creating the problem, they were just responding to a new reality that government policy had created. They filled a gap that traditional buyers were locked out of.
And this really gets to the heart of it. Focusing on investors is kind of like treating the sniffles when you've got the flu. It's a symptom, not the actual disease. The real causes are a fundamental lack of housing supply and the financial rules that dictate who gets to buy a home and who doesn't.
So if going after investors is a dead end, what's the real solution? Well, it boils down to something really, really simple and kind of obvious when you think about it.
And this right here, this is the fundamental tension in all American housing policy. On one hand, you have people who already own homes and, understandably, want to protect their property values. On the other hand, you have a growing number of new families and households who just need a place to live. And those two goals, they often pull in completely opposite directions.
And that's why this is the bottom line. You can't solve a shortage by just changing the rules about who's allowed to own the few things you have. It's a math problem. The only way to solve an undersupply problem is with, well, more supply, by building more homes of all kinds, for rent and for sale. Period.
And that brings us right back to that fork in the road. This Road to Housing Act, it really could be the start of a solution. But the whole debate happening inside of it just goes to show how easily good economics can get tangled up in good politics. So the real question is, which path are we going to choose?